Hey, I want to go look through my old Trello projects and sort of do a bit of a retrospective on what I feel like was an appropriate amount of information for me to convey as like a producer of a project, right? These are all projects that I had started and didn't complete in some capacity, and either they were involved with other friends and people like volunteers, or it was just for myself. But I find it interesting to sort of see like how sure the success or the continuation of a project was kind of like directly correlated with how precise I was on how to plan it all out and stuff, right? So for this project, I was working on a Starfox fan game with a bunch of friends. The intent was to be like a 3D adventure exploration game with some action type elements. Um, Interesting to see that, like, yeah, I created basic movement. I got some of my friends' 3D model assets into Godot, and eventually sort of like I could have moved to a fresh Godot project or clean things out whenever I wanted to, but something like motorbike movement, a dialogue system, a save load system. I mean, like, I've done both of these before, but a motorbike movement system was kind of like brand new to me in 3D, especially. Camera movement I figured out, and it was fine. Model imports from Blender. See, like, I had no conception of thinking about, like, how is this going to be animated? How are the levels going to play out? What's the level design going to be like? And, you know, we had a story to follow, but it was still like a loose story and not tied into what the gameplay was going to be like. Even though we met maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and I was always championing those meetings. People seemed interested, but progress seemed slow and difficult to make because none of us had really made a game before, right? Especially if you're only working on it once a week and you've never had that previous experience of like what is needed to make the game happen. It falls apart pretty quickly. So this fell apart pretty quickly. I'm still proud of my ability to like manage this, like, the managing didn't happen here. The managing happened on paper and in journals and notebooks and in video presentations. But I don't think it really worked out super well. Like balancing, this was the production side of things and my video presentation was like the director side of things. And I already had people doing writing and 3D modeling, and then one person was offering to help me with code, but the project didn't seem like it was going anywhere. Fair enough, yeah. But let's look at this next board. Was more of a generalist board for different projects, so I don't have a whole lot of specifics here. Later, I ended up finding my own board specifically for this Proto Skater project. Just my attempt to recreate the Tony Hawk gameplay, but in a prototype for Godot. And yeah, I'd started to figure out like what kind of models I wanted. I found this really nice tile set for skateboarding. I found really cool animations on Mixamo that I was starting to integrate, and audio for skateboard sound effects. I'll go more into that in a little bit. Roblox Dev was just kind of like me messing around with Roblox, seeing what I could make about it. I made a coin hunt game with like an actual counter that updates the server and stuff. I never got very far with it, but it was just kind of a fun experiment. And similarly, this was a collaborative project, Catch Hands, with one of my friends. We basically never got it off the ground past the initial like sketches, so I'm just not going to talk about it. Okay. Next, I have this Borderlands type project that I was working on. I call it Looty Shooty 3D. I was really hurting to have a game like Borderlands, but just in a much smaller scope and without the story, but just like having the mobbing experience and mobbing for loot and being able to shoot that loot was a lot of fun for me. So I wanted to try to make something like that, and I was kind of surprised at how deep I went into this one. This one went a lot further, and I basically stopped it because I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on with my project anymore. It was just too complicated to figure out, like, here's all these interlocking classes, and here's their dependencies, here's all these resources that need to be manually updated, and what I was working with was an RPG, but I wasn't using like any sort of tables to plan it out ahead of time or even to edit the data directly. This was all me making new resources in Godot's ecosystem and updating those as needed. And it was just kind of like a huge mess to navigate. It just got too confusing for me to continue as much as I was trying to refactor things that I saw were getting out of control. So I just had to stop because I couldn't fix certain bugs. I couldn't figure out how to make progress. Even though I had a version control system, I couldn't step back to see where those issues were when I found issues. And updating the game with more content was just becoming a more Herculean task. Maybe I could have saved the project if I got somebody else on board, but I felt kind of disillusioned from this project at some point and just had to stop. Now let's see here. Of all these different things, yeah, I was kind of hoping to find some way to keep the game compatible for most players, like GLES2 and playing it on web, switching particles over to CPU particles. But I did manage to get to a point of creating like shooting, picking up loot as it came up, and having enemies that drop loot when they die, picking from a randomized selection of loot as well, and having different rarities and sort of like color trails flying over. Hold on, let me grab a clip of that. Yeah, so here was me using some of the default guns, and each of the guns' tracers are shown as a little red dot on the screen. The timer's just showing sort of like how long it takes for the gun to reset before it can shoot again, and the second timer showing this weapon switch time. The enemies have very basic AI of just go towards the player, try to attack, and sometimes they might miss, and then they'll go away for a little bit. This was my quick solution to not having to animate anything. But you can see each of these enemies also drops unique guns. Each of the guns have a different title and sometimes have a different rarity associated with it. There's also different gun types like SMG, shotgun, pistol, and sniper. And between those, I thought I'd make something interesting out of having a lot of variety. I don't have a clip that shows like a legendary dropping, but each of this was like very malleable and flexible in its approach. So I could have had like a really weak sniper or a really powerful pistol, and I could have tuned the properties of each of those guns to be like something more specific. So with all these extra details, it felt like kind of more paramount for me to get really specific about how I was organizing this project. So it was me identifying bugs like the animation of the gun doesn't match the gun resource type. And so I had made animations for multiple different types of guns, but I wasn't able to switch out the animations just yet. There was some issue with like the string parsing. Stuff like guns repeating sounds and they're fired too fast for just a single audio player to cache correctly. I made a different enemy type that does like a shockwave effect, but they didn't do damage for some reason. I was wanting to show the player health on the UI because the player does take health if they're attacked, so you can see the red screen flash. But I finished guns that drop, shooting, movement, enemy health, gun resources that I can edit in the engine, shooting multiple gun types like pistols and shotguns, swapping between them, having multiple enemy types, random sounds on enemies. Found a cool sound pack of somebody's voice, and debug tracers, and I did manage to get picking up guns for a period of time before I broke it. When I broke that, that was kind of like the straw on the camel's back for me. And most importantly, is I have an entire list of stuff that I just scoped out of the project because I felt like it was just not gonna work out to be like useful for the project, or it was too complicated. So stuff like trying to make the rotation of thrown guns feel like more natural, like I just didn't care about that. Same with like RPG leveling stats. I only cared about rarity and random chance. I didn't want to have to deal with like scaling everything up along a linear curve like there is in games like Borderlands and Destiny. Yeah, there's a charm system in Borderlands that slowly raises one of your rare drop stats in place of like a common gun stat. It was too bothersome. Same with like custom quality settings. I was finally understanding that I was setting up way too much work for myself by like doing the video options and the 3D quality options first before I even had a game. visibility notifier on like an item body so that you get like the UI pop-up like there is in the other games when you see a new item that shows up on screen for the first time. On-screen GUI that follows a 3D position. Same deal with Borderlands. Actually, no. Borderlands has like in-world billboard GUI. I think other games have this sort of like positional tracked cursor thing. And rocket launchers and other projectile weapons. That would have been really cool, but of course I didn't get to that point, and I felt like it was just appropriate to scope it out for now. And navigation on enemies. Navigation in 3.x was really bad. It was only really best suited for like Metal Gear Solid and not a whole lot else. So I just didn't bother. Especially like with procedurally generated enemies. I just didn't want to bother figuring that out. I just wanted to have them tank towards you and then have you play in like arena style levels, I guess. Yeah, but this is the project that I'm most proud of for like organizing and being the most specific about and actually getting the furthest with. Next up, last one, is Slopestyle. Oh boy, this is the one that I did the absolute most preparation on. Just make sure this doesn't interrupt. So this is something I actually planned to like launch publicly originally, back when I was working on the project, and I even did publish a build of this onto my itch.io page. I can show you. Yeah, so here the kinematic border prototype. It's just a prototype. I wanted a very specific visual look to it. It's very like primitive looking. I think I spent most of the time actually like working on the UI more than anything, and the 3D physics involved was just kind of difficult for me to interpret or figure out properly. But I was still pretty dedicated to try to split up every task as much as I possibly could to better understand what it needed to do. So I was looking at stuff like, hey, the tooltips, the font size, general text readability, menus on gameboard, keyboard and gamepad, missing accessibility features, UI fitting screen sizes, menu bugs. I actually really cared about the UI for this project. I made a few YouTube videos about them back in the earlier stages of my channel that you can go check out. I'll link them in the description. Stuff like, okay, yeah, and then eventually I would get to stuff like the snowboard model, character model, performance of FPS, skyboxes, Z clip bounds, graphics options. Kind of superficial stuff, really. Like, to me, it felt important, but this is not what the game needed to be done. Bugs that I'm aware of. Character movement. Oh no. Audio missing or not working. That was interesting. This was actually a game I was making my own models for, though, for the first time, which was fun. Like, character model that had been completely rigged and weighted. A original snowboard model that I used in the game as well. I don't think I even updated that to be used in this game. Yeah, something else is going on. I'm not using either of those models that I made, and I probably should have updated it. Oh well. Physics to do, right? So there was a lot of stuff I wanted to do with the character movements that was a bit difficult to conceive of. This whole like centripetal force turning, and I was looking at like different articles that were describing how snowboard physics work. And trying to interpolate that into how I could code this for Godot. And it just didn't really work out. I just didn't have enough experience doing 3D physics. I have enough that I've been working on like 3D character controllers pretty regularly now. So maybe I've got a better sense of what I could do to make like a better snowboard controller. Still just kind of difficult, and a lot of it is still based around like making good vehicle style controller stuff, and I'm still used to the character style. I might just have to spend more time with vehicles in games before I would get good at what would feel like a good snowboard character controller. I even had like other alternate options, like raycasting distance from the ground and using that to interpolate like a position on the plane, right? Race logic, state machine, because still to figure out how state machines worked. Rig legs. Really? I asked myself to calibrate my monitor for color. That's interesting. Or use global illumination. I didn't need that. Right. Okay. But something that this project did push me to do, though, is that I submitted a Godot engine proposal to improve curves, which actually was picked up. And people did talk about it, and then later adapted the 2D style handles to 3D. So thank you, Arcore. And eventually, this was merged in way back in 2020 in the current version of the 4.0 engine. So shift held, yeah. Yeah, so if that's the only thing that this project did, then maybe it was worth it, right? Modular menus, yeah. And I was also considering studying like my inspirations like SSX, Shanghai snowboarding, 1080 Avalanche as well, just for like locations and level design and just sort of the general vibe. But I realized that's sort of a higher level approach, and I was still working on getting the lower level stuff done properly. And yeah, well, it was an interesting experiment, and I definitely enjoyed like working through the process of trying to break things down as like a producer of the project. Still like focusing too hard on the superficial stuff. Like, please give feedback about the skybox and the Z clip bounds. Like, no player cares about that. They just want it to look good, and they care about the gameplay more than anything, right? That didn't stop me from adding a gallery screen, and that didn't stop me from finding good HDRs and stuff, and making a modular menu system. Anyway. So those are my game projects, old Trello boards that I thought I just wanted to go through and talk a bit about, just give my own thoughts on. Mostly for my own introspection and just sort of helping inform where I'm going to go in the future if the next time that I pick up a game project and want to do sort of a heavier production role on it. But in any case, yeah, thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you guys whenever.